Hello, my name is Alex Isles and welcome back. In today's episode, we're going to look at the period of the War of Three Kingdoms, or the English Civil War. Hello, thank you for joining us. In today's episode, we're going to look at the really difficult period of British history, the War of Three Kingdoms, also known as the English Civil War, where you've got war in Scotland, war in England, war in Ireland, and how all of that comes together to cause social change throughout the whole of the British Isles. Christmas time during this period was a really important time, and it caused a lot of disputes because at this time there was a lot of interest in the way that Christianity should be practiced in the British Isles. Now obviously, throughout the Middle Ages, in the episode we covered last, you saw how the celebration became more and more joyous, more and more full of energy, how there were more and more things like people would dress up as saints, there would be gift giving, focused on the Christmas service, how there would be Christmas plays, stories, biblical stories done by town guilds, all of those sort of things together, and how Christmas became feasting and drinking and social time. Well, with the creation of the Church of England and the separation from the Roman Catholic Church and the wide movement of Protestantism across Europe, this saw a new form of Reformation as well, where Christianity became a far more serious and a much more of a focus on the Bible. So moving away from the traditions of the Roman Catholic Church, there was now a focus on the Bible itself. And if it wasn't in the Bible, then many of the reformers and Protestants at the time just went, well, we're not going to do it. And so celebrations like Christmas, which aren't actually in the Bible, then were seen as papish, were seen as Catholic, were seen as anti-Protestant, and so because of that, they were cracked down on. And so we start seeing this separation, or the sort of the movement away from Christmas as it was practiced in the Middle Ages. And this is something we'll cover today. So we're going to start off by some of the key dates that occurred. The 27th of December, 1641, and this is before the Civil War started, or at least the English Civil War. Now, to give you some context, there had been the Bishops' War in Scotland because Charles had tried to put the Common English Prayer Book into Scotland and they had refused. It had caused a lot of trouble. They tried to put English bishops in Scotland, or tried to create bishops in Scotland, and this had caused riots, and the Scots had marched down. There'd been the Battle of Newburn just outside of Newcastle. The English had lost it. Newcastle and Durham were occupied, and the English forces were having to pay a huge amount of money to the Scots every single day, and it was £850 a day, which in today's money is around about £144,000 a day. So it's an insane sum of money, and they were occupying Newcastle, and when they occupied Newcastle and Durham, this was causing a lot of unrest in other parts of the country because, just as today, when governments have to spend a huge amount of money, citizens go, well, we have to pay tax for that. And so this causes disquiet, this causes trouble, and this led up to actual riots in London. Now these riots were then made even worse because Parliament was trying to reduce the power of Charles. When they were trying to reduce the power of Charles, they were trying to put through laws, and he had actually stopped some of this from happening, and he then wanted to wind up to Parliament in return. So what Parliament had tried to do was to basically reduce the powers of the king and to separate his power away from the army. When they had tried to do this, Charles was offended. So he wanted to get back at Parliament. When he wanted to get back at Parliament, he chose the most unsuitable person possible, a guy called Colonel Lunsford, to become the Lieutenant of the Tower of London. Now this is where the Royal Mint was, and also where the Armoury for London was, and a lot of power for the city. And this guy Lunsford was hated. He was basically seen as one of the worst officials in England at this time. He was known as a womanizer. He had fled to France for attempted murder. He had basically only just come back to fight in the Battle of Newburn, where he had actually shown himself as a decent fighter. And so Charles had then basically pardoned him. And, Charles hadn't made a good decision in this. This guy, in every other account, was a really bad human being. And when he was a really bad human being, the people of London suddenly hear that the guy who's responsible for making all the coins and has access to all the weapons in the city is this guy, Lunsford. When they hear about that, they're just like, right, And we do not want this, and there starts to become civil disobedience and unrest. Parliament takes 2 days off, and on the 27th of December a mob forms and storms into the Hall of Westminster. When they're inside Westminster Hall, this is where Parliament normally meets, and they're yelling, "No more bishops, no more bishops." They're getting more and more angry, and they just will not be told to go away, even if they know that Lunsford has been basically fired by the king at this time. Charles has heard about this. He decides to make the politically expedient move, fires Lunsford. But the people are not calmed down by it. Don't want to disband, and the rioters just start getting more and more loud, and they're still inside Parliament. Lunsford hears about this and gathers a body of 30 to 40 equally horrendous men. He arms them and they storm into Westminster Hall, and they just start setting about to people. They start attacking them, they slash them with all their cutlasses, their rapiers. They start wounding people and injuring them, and they basically force them out of Westminster. And this causes a huge amount of disagreement. It turns the hall into a battleground. There's blood everywhere. It makes the king incredibly unpopular. And London basically just goes, "We are not happy with Charles anymore." So Charles packs up his family and then leaves, and basically starts leaving London as a whole, because he realizes the city's turned against him because of his poor decisions. And then in 1642, that's when the Civil War actually begins. So you can see there, again, the set piece of Christmas, Parliament is off, and the dangers going on there leads to riotous actions inside the capital. The next step in the whole story is going slightly forwards on into 1643. And what happens then is that Cromwell bans Christmas. Now, this is not exactly as it sounds. What he does is he bans the Christmas service. So people aren't allowed to go to Christmas services during the Christmas period. So the festival of Christmas is not actually banned. You can do what you want at this time in 1643, but the Christmas service is now illegal. And on top of this as well, colourful clothing is now also banned. So you're supposed to wear drab clothing in blacks and greys and whites. And then the soldiers go around London and they start confiscating people's Christmas food out of their houses. So if you can imagine, you started cooking Christmas dinner and then suddenly soldiers burst into your house, grab your Christmas meal out of the oven, so your turkey or your beef or your lamb or whatever you're cooking, and they take it from you, it's going to cause bad blood. And things started getting even worse, because in 1644, Parliament had actually started putting forward an idea which had been put forward by a number of ministers within Britain. And from 1642, it had actually been the case that the last Wednesday of every month was supposed to be a day of solemn fasting. And this was to focus people's mind on God and to get them away from some of the more Catholic traditions. And so because of that, people would fast from 1642 onwards. When they were fasting all this time, 1644 comes along. Christmas Day fell on a Wednesday. So suddenly you've got even more tension, because the whole of the people in the country are told they are not allowed to basically do anything on Christmas Day. You're not allowed to have a Christmas meal or anything like that. You all have to be enforced to actually have a solemn fast. And both houses of Parliament, the House of Lords and the House of Commons, basically practice this themselves. But whether or not it was enforced by the normal people is another matter. You've already got to remember by this point you're not allowed to wear colourful clothing, and now a solemn fast has fallen on Christmas. So that would have then made people even more angry in many ways against Cromwell and his government at that time. From 1645 to 1647, a group of ministers actually came up with an idea to ban all holy days and holy festivals. Their basic argument was that if it's not in the Bible, you shouldn't be doing it. And so because of that, they basically said, right, we're not going to allow any holy festivals. And so stuff like Shrove Tuesday, a number of other festivals as well, so all basically just banned. You were not allowed to practice these. You were not allowed to have these festivals throughout the year. And when these festivals were banned, this continued throughout the whole of the Long Parliament, and then right up until the point in the 1650s where Oliver Cromwell becomes Lord Protector, or what we would today understand as dictator of the country, and he rules it with the same powers as a monarch. And so he takes over Britain and its Commonwealth throughout the whole of the world, and basically rules it with an iron fist. And he has a very, very strong belief about what he needs to do at that time to basically help society. Because in many ways, I think Cromwell believed that he was doing the best for society, but he also at the same time believed that the end of the world was coming. So because of that, he could then justify to himself a lot of the actions he did and how that caused trouble in and around the whole of the British Isles and also to people himself. But because of that, you can understand that for that whole time, 1645 to 1647, the ministers are discussing that, and then it's put into law in 1647 onwards, and then lasts till 1660, when what happens is that Charles II is restored after Cromwell's death, and then he repeals all of the laws that Cromwell did and basically becomes known as the party king, because suddenly you're allowed to party, allowed to have fun, everyone's having a great time. Now in 1647 as well, in Kent, there is another riot, and this is because the mayor is trying to enforce Parliament's laws. Now, because Christmas is no longer a holy day, he demands that all of the shops have to be opened. But people still have their traditions. And what happens is as well is that they know their biblical law as well. They know their Bible. And Jesus famously actually went into the temple. And when he went into the temple, he turned over the tables of people buying and selling in the temple. And so during Christmas Day and holy days, people didn't want to buy and sell. Parliament, though, has said there are no holy days anymore that aren't biblical. So other than, these solemn fasts and prayers and stuff, all of the holy days and the festivals are gone. So now the mayor is trying to enforce Parliament's rules, and what he does is he's going around the place and he's forcing shops to open. And when he's forcing shops to open, this then gets more and more anxious. The merchants, the businessmen, they start getting very angry. They attack him. They force him to the ground. They tear his robes. He's covered in mud. And then people move back. And he thinks that he's actually managed, the mayor of Canterbury in Kent, to actually cause the people to disperse by the power of his voice. Then he realizes that he hasn't, because what happens next is a football match kicks off. Now, when a football match kicks off, this is then a huge thing. People are playing football in town, and it's old medieval football. It's not the modern day game, so it's a very violent sport as well. And then at the end of the football game, a riot kicks off, and they basically just trash town and go around the place rioting. And they try the next year in 1648 to actually bring people to trial, but even then people aren't really that keen to bring people to trial over this, and so it never goes anywhere. In 1648 Parliament, what they do is they actually execute Charles I. And so when they execute him, suddenly now the people don't have that focus. There's no hope of a royalist restoration, at least for that time, and the War of Three Kingdoms then continues as Scotland declares Charles II as king in exile, and then that causes for Cromwell to be involved in fighting in Scotland, fighting in Ireland, and then eventually becoming Lord Protector in the 1650s onwards. And for that next period, right up until 1660, there is no Christmas, there's no holy days, you're not allowed to wear colourful clothing, you have to wear blacks and whites, and the Puritans are in control. 1660, when King Charles I comes back, he makes music, theatre, cake, Christmas and festivals legal again, so obviously you can imagine a massive win for him. And the Puritans then go off and they go over to the New World and eventually become a part of the American colonies. So there's an interesting part of history for you right there. So that's a little bit of how, at this period, there's this clash between the old medieval Catholic traditions and the new Protestant traditions, and how this results in an understanding of how many people today say, oh, Cromwell banned Christmas, but it was a slow and steady process where Cromwell may not have been directly involved, but he would have agreed with a lot of the different things that were happening at that time, because he would have seen them as papish, Catholic, and not and old traditions or pagan traditions, rather than pure Christianity, which he saw as an extreme form of Protestantism. So I really hope you've enjoyed today's video. I've enjoyed sharing this with you. As always, please do like and subscribe, share the video with your friends, and I hope you'll join me next episode for Victorian Christmas. Until then, stay safe and well, and Merry Christmas.